Hey everyone, this is going to be a tutorial and also a reminder to myself of how to create this VR 360-degree workflow pipeline that specifically involves having an equirectangular scene as the background and some non-destructive compositing on top of 3D elements moving around within this space while keeping the background still. So I'm going to jump into a dome player of what that looks like. So here we have a simulated dome, and we can see the background is still and those 3D objects are moving past us. This is just a short 5-second loop. It is totally messy and chaotic, but it's just throwing some assets in so you can see what it looks like as I move around the dome. We can see that there's this metaphysical object we're passing through. These gold spheres are passing by us. And then there's another one, if I go from this angle, passing from one side to the other. It gets a little nuts because they all kind of pass through the space at the same time. But this is now looking at the back of this dome simulation, and we can see that those objects move right past us in that space. If I look at the top, they're all clean there. Alright, so let's dive in and see what we can do. Okay, so let's see if we can build this from scratch. I've got my basic assets in the project panel. First thing I'm going to do is create my foundational composition from my main footage. Now this is an equirectangular 360-degree scene that I created. It's from one of my digital paintings, and I've animated it to run in a loop. Right, so you can see that looping, but I want the composition to be longer. So what I'm going to do there is change the composition settings to, I'm just going to make this 10 seconds, and I'm going to change the name of this to Scene 1. Alright, so now that the composition's longer, I also need this footage to be looping. So I'm going to go to Time, Enable Timer Mapping, Alt-click the stopwatch, and add the expression loop out, put a semicolon after it, go to the end, and now, as I drag along, you can see that this is looping. I also want to make sure that this main feature, the owl, is actually on the center, so I'm going to grab the offset effect from the effects panel and start dragging this over so that it aligns with the center. There we go. So one of the things here is that it's important to set up your foundational scene exactly how you want to use it. So this is the size that I'm starting with, and everything's going to come from there. Great. So now I want to make this into a VR editor scene so that I can move things around in a 3D space on top of this. So what I do for that is I go to Window, all the way down to VR Comp Editor in the JSX files, and it'll open a panel. It might just pop up as a floating window for you. And I'm going to add a 3D edit. Okay, so I have Scene 1 selected, and it's going to be HD. I'm going to check all the boxes so I have access to them while I'm editing, and click Add 3D Edit. Now, the first window that'll open is this sort of VR simulation scene, so you can move around, you can see what everything looks like. It's looking pretty good. The other composition, I should say, that opens up is this VR output. So this is where you do anything. Once you move objects around in the edit scene, this is where they will appear. And it looks similar to this foundational Scene 1, but there is a bit of difference. So if I zoom in to these, there's a bit of artifacts that happen because of how this is creating a cube map. So you can see this weird little glitch here on the top of the tree there. If I go back to Scene 1, you'll see it disappears. And you might notice when I switch between them, there's a few other features that get kind of glitched out. There's some artifacts, and that's happening because it's creating a cube map from that main scene. So if I go into that here and go into this VR conversion, zoom out, this is the cube map, and you can see that the edges are blended and it's wrapping it all together with these different cameras. Now we don't really need to deal with that, so I'm going to close those down. lock it back up. And here we are in the VR edit scene. I'm going to open a new comp viewer, and I'm going to make this the output so we can see what's happening. We're just going to have a look at these blending controls in case you want to fine tune them yourself. So here they are in the VR edit scene. You'll see the VR blending controls. Now, if I, for example, change the blending expansion to 0, keep your eye on the screen on the right. And there we go. So it kind of made these dark edges. It might be a little hard to see on your screen there. I'm going to lower the resolution to make that quicker also. And let's just put them both to 0 and see what happens. So it kind of looks like everything's fine, but when you zoom in, there you go, you start to see these lines. So this is where it's breaking the scene apart and making this cube map so it works in the VR editor space. So let's say I bring this blender back up to 50. Now you can really see that edge. So bring the blending expansion up to 50. And of course, this is just something that you could play with. I think they've set it at some defaults that they think generally work with whatever image. I'm not too worried about it because what I'm going to do is actually create a non-destructive composition where I can not have that artifact as the final output. So I'm going to close this down. Now here we are back in the VR edit window. This is the VR simulation. So to get this non-destructive scene that we're going to use as the final composition, I'm going to actually go into my project panel and duplicate scene 1, and then I'm going to call it, let's open that up, go to composition settings, and call it scene 1 master 2-1 so that I know it's the equirectangular scene, and click OK. So now all the settings are the same as the original, and then we're going to come back to this later. So let's say what I want to do is move around some assets in this 3D space. I've got a few objects here that we're going to play with. I'm going to drop in this magical shield. Let's start it there and bring it to the beginning of the comp. Put it on screen blending mode so that it appears here. Shrink it down a bit. There we go. Now, in order to use it in this VR editing space, I have to make it into a 3D object, and it disappears. Now, if I switch the camera view here to this custom view, you can see that it's essentially just sitting just behind the camera. So I'm going to pull it out, and then when I go back to this view, we can see that it's right there. I'm going to keyframe there. I'm going to make sure I can see the position of it. I'm going to drop keyframe there. And let's make this at 5 seconds and the comp there. And I'm going to edit it from this custom view and just drag it so it's zooming right through the camera there. Okay, so now coming back to this VR master camera, we can see that we're kind of passing right through it. It's not quite exactly aligned where I want it to be. It's going a bit down. So when I go back to this frame, I'm going to just bring it up a bit on the y-axis. Okay, so now we have this flying past the camera. So let's add another one going from a different angle. Really make use of this 3D space. Okay, here's this another one of these magical shields. I'm gonna start it there. Beginning of the comp, put it on screen mode, make it a 3D object, and I'm gonna just bump it into the scene just a little bit. And let's have this going from side to side. So I'm gonna orient this, and then we're gonna keyframe it. So I'm just gonna zoom out a bit, and I'm gonna drag it over there to start. I'm gonna change the position and orientation. And to see that better, what we can do is take our camera, and we're moving this in Z space, so you can see it's going to pass by the camera and go all the way to the other side. Check out this other view and just keep dragging it along so it goes right past the camera. So it's not totally horizontal, but it's kind of at this other angle, and it'll just give us more of a feeling that we're in this 3D space. So let's see what that looks like. Let's see what it looks like from the front view. Okay, so there we have this. We got these two objects, one coming at us and one going from side to side. Alright, so now let's see what that looks like in the VR output. Okay, so we can't see it there because this scene needs to be refreshed. So from the VR editor, you go up to the VR comp window, and you have to make sure you do this on the correct scene. If you have multiple build up, make sure you see the title of the one that you're working on, and you press open output/render, and then it will refresh the VR editor, and there we go. So we have these objects moving in 3D space, one going from side to side, and the other is going right past us and right behind us. So that's why it splits there. And you can see it's warping along the edges of this equirectangular scene. Alright, now what if we want to try something else, like trapcode form that has its own 3D settings, so we can't actually use it as a 3D layer because it has its own 3D cameras built into it. We're going to go create a new solid, cost HD, size of the comp, and I'm going to look up form. Okay, now if I orient the camera so that this is basically straight on, that'll help me out. I'm going to change the base form from a grid to a sphere. And you can see that we're basically in the middle of the sphere. The camera's sitting in the center of the sphere. We're not moving the camera around, we're just moving these objects. Call this layer form 1, and then in the position, I'm going to drag it away from us, and also have it coming at us from this back of the scene here. Alright, so I'm going to keyframe it there, and then go down to 5 seconds where the other ones are, and I'm going to put in minus 4,500. That ought to do it. And now if I just scrub through backwards, there goes the shield, and there's the sphere. So if we go back to this custom camera view, you'll see that from the front view, they look like they're kind of moving together, but they're moving a little bit separately. So there's the green one's going from side to side. The form sphere is a little bit in front of the shield, and it's actually quite a bit smaller. And it's hard to get that sense when you're working from that other custom angle, and obviously the background is not accurate here. So this is just to give you an idea of what we're working with within the 3D space. But I'm not really too worried about finessing that in this moment. I just want to play with making sure that I can composite these 3D aspects moving through this space while the background stays the same. Now, if I refresh that again and go into the VR output window and I scrub through, I can see that that is exactly what's happening. We're moving through those objects in this simulated 3D space. Awesome. So now let's see what that looks like when I bring it into the non-destructive master comp. So again, I've created this other composition that has the exact same background. It was a duplicate of the original foundation, but it doesn't have the destructive edges of the cube map. And that was all necessary to create this edit scene. So what I can do is go to the project and find my Scene 1 VR2 output, and I can drag it and composite it right on top of this. Now you can see right away that the background as it appears, we have those destructive layers of the cube map. So how to fix that is I go back to the original foundational scene and actually just turn it off. And then when I go back to the output, you see I'm just dealing with these assets. And then when I go to this master comp, now we have those black boxes because they're not actually alpha channel, so I'm going to put that to a screen blending mode and that fixes that. Now, obviously, it would be better if everything already had alpha channels, so you could build as many compositions as you wanted if you didn't want everything from this VR edit to be on a screen blending mode. But this is just one way that I'm using it for this style of compositing. Okay, so now from this master composition, if we want to see what this is going to look like for a dome master output, because this equirectangular would work for VR output, but we want the dome master output also. So I'm going to go to the project window, and I'm going to find this scene 1 master 2.1 comp, and I'm going to drag it in, make it another composition. And I'm going to find in the effects panel the VR converter and double click it to add it to that layer as an effect. And I'm going to select the input as equirectangular 2.1 and the output as fisheye dome. Okay, so now we have to change the field of view and the tilt axis. I'm going to put the tilt to 90, and I'm going to bring up this field of view so that we can see some of the ground. I don't want to do it too much, it'll look too warped, so I just want to be able to see this ground, and a little bit of the water is going to be good enough for how I want to do it. And we can see there are those assets moving through this simulated 3D dome space. Awesome, looking pretty good. Okay, so now that we have that all operating well, what would happen if we wanted to add some other 3D elements, like from the Element 3D plugin? Well, I did find that it didn't work very well from within this original VR edit scene. So we're going to composite another way of creating this VR editor. So initially, just as a reminder, we went from window and opened the VR comp editor window, which is this panel here. Now, there's another way to create a VR master, and that is from the composition window, and we go VR, create VR environment. So we want to create a new VR master, and I'm going to make it 2048 by 2048 because I know that that will be a good enough size. It will fit onto my other compositions, and I'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to make it 30 frames per second to match my other comp. And then I'm going to check all of these boxes again so we make sure we have access to them, and I'm going to create the VR master. Put this to the side because we're going to need that panel again later. So we have the VR master camera and the cam controller, and it creates this square scene. So now I want to put in the Element 3D plugin. So I'm going to make a new solid that fits this space. Okay, 2K square. And we're going to find element from Video Copilot. Now I'm just going to drop in something quick here that I already have a preset for, just to initiate this 3D space, because I don't want to go too much into this plugin. There's a lot of other tutorials online for how to use it, but you can use it fully within this VR master space. Okay, so I've made this basic grid, and I'm going to create a null object controller for this grid of spheres. And I'm going to open that and move it away from the camera. So we've got these 3 rows of spheres, and I'm going to change the camera view so you can see what that looks like. So we could control it like that also. Essentially, you can build your entire VR scene from this view, but that would be, and you can move your camera around in it, but that would be if you just wanted to stay in this. And again, because I'm compositing with a equirectangular scene, that's the steps that I'm going through here. So let's keyframe that. Gonna start the position there, go to 5 seconds, Let's have it move way past the camera again, so we really get a sense of that 3D space. All right. And there we go. Maybe it starts a little low and then moves up. Gotcha. Okay, so we'll have it starting low and then it goes right past us and it's kind of moving up. So we'll really get a sense of that space. Now, once you have some things created in this window, actually I'm going to change this to call it VR World. VR 3D World. Just so I don't get it confused with my other scenes that are called Master. So VR 3D World. Now once you have this created, now you want to create a VR output from this scene. So in this VR environment window, that again, if it's gone missing, it's up in composition, VR, create VR environment. If you go there, it will open another one, but it doesn't matter. You can use either. So here's the original window, and what we want to do is create VR from current composition. Now, it might have selected a different scene, so you really want to make sure that you have the proper scene selected, which in this case is the 3D world. And you want to make sure all the settings here are the same. You have all those checked, as far as I know. And then generate VR output. If I scrub through, you can see that it is making use of the equirectangular scene. It has created a cube map, and we have these 3D assets moving through this space. Awesome. So if I do any edits in this composition, let's say for example that I go into the scene setup and I create another object here. Let's just put it in another group. Green glass. Okay, so I've got this other object there. Now, if I go back to this world output, I don't see it there. So this works the same as the other VR editor. Okay. So because that was set on group 1, all the controls for that are the same as group 1. So if I were back in the scene setup and I made this into a different group, it's not going to have that same effect. But I kind of like it like that. So to get this to show up in the VR world output, we have to use this window again and click the refresh VR output window. Now make sure that it hasn't jumped to another scene, because sometimes it'll do that and it can mess it up. So press refresh VR output. And there we go. Now we have those glass rings and the gold orbs flying through this space. So now what do I do if I want to add that? I want to composite those elements with my other equirectangular scene. So you might think you can bring it into the editor here and just drop it in, or the output scene. Because at first, it looks like that would work. So we're going to go to this, find the world output, and drop it in here. And see, at first it kind of looks like that works. Like it's in there all right, kind of moving the same as the other objects. However, when I refresh that and we go into this, it does that. And that's not what we want. It must have something to do with the cube map mapping and all the different cameras. And I don't need to use it in this scene anyway. I'm going to refresh that again. And just a quick note while I'm here is this was the original VR edit scene. If I want to do some more things there and I want the reference of this background, all I have to do is turn it back on and go back to the edit scene and it will appear. But I don't want it, so it's off. Alright, so to composite those 3D elements in this scene, what we do is we drag that VR world output here. Now, let's see what that looks like. Alright, looks pretty good from here. Now let's see what it looks like in the Dome Master. Okay, so it's just scrubbing pretty slow, but we can see it looks like it's working, but oh, wait a second, what's that happening at the top? Looks like we're getting a bit of a pinch. There we go. See how that one orb is pinching there? that's because this output scene is not the same size as the other equirectangular scene that we're working in. So if I go to the settings here, it's actually a lot bigger. So to fix that, I'm going to go to this equirectangular master scene, make sure I know the size, so it's 6144 on the long edge, and what I can do is just change this composition to match that. Alright, it resets, everything's still working there, and now when I go back to this master scene, I'm just going to delete it and re-add it, just so that it's refreshed to exactly how I want it to be, and scrub through, and there we can see it's blending, it's warping right along that equirectangular edge exactly as we want it to, and perfect. So right at the apex of the dome, that sphere is round, it's not pinching, that's exactly what we want. And you can see all these objects moving through this 3D space in the dome master and on this composited scene. And we have the background is still, that's exactly what I want. I want to be able to have 3D assets moving through this scene while having the background stay the same. And I can do different controls with the background from the original foundational scene or from here. And if you were going to render out the dome master, you would do that from here. And a VR scene, you would do that from this equirectangular master. So from here, you would go composition, add to render queue, and then in the settings, make sure you select VR output. And then of course in the dome master, you can either render it directly from After Effects or in the media encoder and just select whatever settings you need from there. Alright, so that's it for that tutorial. Thanks for checking it out. I hope that it was helpful to some of you in your dome or VR productions. It's a lot to take in, how to make these things, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm still new to it and making mistakes and learning, so recording my process to help myself and others along the way. And that's all for now.